They raised their glasses to him, as if he were a king. My father, Richard Coleman, stood beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Waldorf ballroom, his silver hair catching the light like a crown. The applause was deafening, the praise relentless, the spotlight fixed entirely on the son he adored, Alexander. And then, in that same room filled with governors, CEOs, and old money friends, my father turned his head, found me in the shadows at the back, and spoke words that sliced deeper than any knife Ethan you would have had. Nothing. You should never have been born. That was the moment the air collapsed, the music stalled, champagne froze halfway to painted lips, and then laughter. A cruel wave of laughter rolled over me, as if humiliation were the evening's entertainment. Even my mother Victoria lowered her eyes to her wine glass, unwilling to intervene. I stood there, a son erased in front of hundreds, while Alexander smirked like he had already been crowned emperor of the empire. And yet even as the shame burned through me, a hand would soon press a sealed envelope into me, a letter heavy enough to turn this night into something none of them expected. Before I continue, I want to invite you, yes, you watching right now, to tell me how this moment strikes you. What would you feel if your own parent said you should not exist? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Your stories matter here. And if this kind of truth, raw and unvarnished, resonates with you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. My name is Ethan Coleman. I am 41 years old, a project manager in a small architectural firm that builds mid-rise apartments along the East Coast. I've spent my adult life away from the Coleman empire, carving out something modest, unremarkable, perhaps, but mine. Yet nothing I built could prepare me for the night my father stripped me of dignity before the world. The ballroom itself was a cathedral to his power marble floors, polished to a mirror's shine walls, lined with photographs of Richard Coleman, shaking hands with presidents, governors, and magnates. The air smelled of money and cigars, and the music from a live quartet floated like background applause for his achievements. People swarmed around Alexander, laughing too loud at his jokes, gripping his arm, as though touching him would bring them closer to the empire's fortune. He wore his custom-tailored suit, like a second skin, his jaw square, his smile rehearsed, a man molded from birth to play air. I stayed in the shadows near the service door, the place where servers disappeared with empty trays. I didn't belong in the glow of chandeliers surrounding my father's eyes, not in any ways. I had grown used to it, the silence, the downward glances, the cruel jokes masked as banter. Still, somewhere deep in me, I carried a fragile ember of hope that maybe tonight, amid all the pageantry, he might spare me a single word of acknowledgement. Not love. No, I had stopped wishing for that long ago, but recognition. Instead, he chose annihilation. And the laughter that followed was meant to bury me. But buried things have a way of returning. The words hung in the air like a verdict, and for a moment the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Then it broke into that cold, easy laughter that wealthy people practice when they want to make someone small. My father's dismissal wasn't subtle. It was a public sentence delivered with the casual cruelty of a man used to moving people like chess pieces. Men in bespoke suits chuckled into their napkins. A senator raised his eyebrows and looked away. A reporter's pen hesitated. Alexander's laugh cut through everything bright and practiced, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to watch me shrink. My mother's hand trembled around her glass, but she did not speak. Her silence was a language I had learned to read long ago, the careful politeness that chooses the family theater over a child's dignity. I felt the color drain from my face. For a second, I was a child again on the porch steps, ears ringing from another of my father's late-night lectures, told I was a mistake, and then left to sort the pieces alone. That memory arrived like a tide-cold, inescapable patience. In the ballroom's light, my life condensed into a single point, the place where I had always stood in the margins. The heat behind my eyes was not from the chandeliers, but from something older, a shame worn thin by years of habit. My palms were slick. I tightened my fingers into fists to stop them from trembling. The urge to leave was a simple, desperate thing. Walk out the side door, let the night swallow me, find the car I'd come in, and drive until the city's lights blurred into oblivion. My legs moved before my courage did. I rose from the chair, the scrape of the metal leg against marble, loud in my ears. Heads turned, as if the orchestra had cued a new act, the accidental son exiting. Alexander leaned back, his posture perfect, and made a small mock bow that the cameras dutifully framed. A woman near him covered her mouth to whisper a joke. I could feel every eye as a weight pressing on my spine. The corridor toward the service exit smelled of lemon polish and deferred dignity. Servers glided past with silver trays, their faces blank rehearsals of indifference. I kept my steps measured, trying to carry myself like a man who was not dissolving. Halfway there, the laughter swelled behind me, a tide of amusement at the spectacle my father had made. My throat tightened. I wanted to run to hide in some quiet street corner and pull the night over my head. But as I reached the shadowed doorway, a presence at my elbow stopped me in a way the laughter never could. An older man I barely knew, a family friend of my grandfather, his face creased with years, and worry had slipped alongside me. He did not look like the others. His eyes were not searching for headlines or advantage. He folded a paper into my hand with fingers that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lead. The envelope was warm from being held, the seal pressed deep, as if the act of sealing had required effort and intent. He leaned close and said in a voice that left no room for jest, "Don't open it now. Not here. But don't walk away from it either." There was urgency in the pause, a warning and a promise braided together. I stood there, the envelope heavy and absurd in my palm, the laughter like a distant storm. My father's words still thrummed in my ears, but this small gesture, a simple transfer of paper, shifted the room's gravity. For the first time that night, something private had been pointed at me with purpose. The door to the back alley gaped the city beyond, offering escape, but my feet did not move. The paper rested against my skin, an accusation or an answer. I did not yet know which. The weight of that envelope was wrong for its size. Thin paper should have felt like nothing yet in my palm, pressed down heavily like marble beneath my shoes. I stood frozen in the corridor, the laughter from the ballroom echoing like a cruel refrain, while Robert Hayes' voice lingered in my ear. "When you're ready, open it. Don't let anyone take it from you." Robert. I knew his name only in passing, an old associate of my grandfather, a man who attended family gatherings with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much. He wasn't flashy like the politicians at my father's table, nor greedy-eyed like the investors clinging to Alexander's every word. Tonight, his presence felt different, deliberate. The furrow in his brow, the insistence in his whisper, it wasn't the casual kindness of a guest pitying the humiliated son. It was a lifeline thrown into a storm. I glanced back into the ballroom. Through the open doors I saw Alexander basking in the attention glasses raised toward him, as if he were already seated on a throne. My father's shoulders were squared, his grin sharp and triumphant, as though erasing me had restored his strength. No one noticed I was gone. No one missed me. Yet in my hand, I held something that none of them had accounted for. The envelope's seal glinted faintly under the hallway lights, a golden crest pressed into thick wax. I traced it with my thumb and felt a chill. My grandfather's family insignia. Memories rose unbidden, my grandfather's hand on my shoulder when I was a boy, his rare moments of warmth, his voice telling me that kindness wasn't weakness, no matter what my father claimed. He had died years ago, and with him any illusion of protection I thought remained. But here in this fragile rectangle of paper was his presence again alive in a way that startled me. "Don't let anyone take it." The warning echoed louder than the laughter. Suddenly the hallway felt exposed, the walls closing in. I tucked the envelope into my jacket close to my chest, as if it were a heartbeat I could not risk losing. I should have walked out the service door into the wet Manhattan night, let the city swallow me whole. That would have been the safe choice, the familiar choice of silence. But my legs betrayed me. I turned drawn back toward the glow and the noise as though some unseen current was pulling me into the fire I'd been running from all my life. Every step back toward the ballroom was agony, the clamor of celebration sharpening into mockery with each stride. Yet beneath the shame, something else stirred a pulse of defiance, faint but undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility that I was holding more than humiliation. Perhaps in this sealed letter was proof that my father's power wasn't the final word. I tightened my grip over my jacket pocket. Whatever truth Robert Hayes had placed in my hands, I would not let it be buried. Not tonight. I stepped back into the ballroom, the envelope burning against my chest, and at first it felt as though nothing had changed. The chandeliers still blazed, the music still hummed politely in the background, and Alexander still floated at the center of it all, smiling as if the crown of an empire already rested on his head. But the moment I returned, I sensed the cracks, hairline fractures in the performance my family had staged. My father laughed too loudly at a joke. My mother's pearls shifted nervously beneath her hand. And just beyond the stage, I caught sight of a shadow where two voices tangled in hurried whispers. I moved closer, careful to blend with the crowd, and the words sharpened as I drew. "We can't risk it, Alex." Sophia's voice hissed, urgent and sharp. "If there's any trace of the old will, any letter from Henry, it has to disappear. Tonight, before anyone else sees it." Her tone carried the same icy calculation I'd felt from her since childhood, though we had never truly grown close. My half-sister, polished and ruthless, was her mother's daughter in every sense. And Alexander, my golden brother, leaned in his grin, slipping into a grimace. "Relax, Sophia." Father's humiliated into silence. Ethan lifted. He never does. Still. His voice dropped lower, dangerous now. "I'll handle it. If Hayes or anyone else thinks they can dig up Henry's scraps, they'll regret it." The blood drained from my face. They knew. They knew my grandfather had left something behind. The envelope in my pocket seemed to grow heavier, hotter, as though it pulsed with their words. I should have turned away, slipped back into anonymity, but I couldn't. My body locked ears, straining the truth, pressing harder with each syllable they traded. For years, I thought my silence was survival. But in that shadowed corner, I understood silence had always been their weapon, not mine. A rustle stirred behind me. I turned slightly and caught sight of Marlene, the housekeeper, who had served our family longer than I had been alive. She was half hidden by a column, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed not on the stage but on the conspirators. There was something in her gaze, a knowledge too heavy to carry, that made me wonder what else had been buried in this house of secrets. Our eyes met for an instant, and though she quickly looked away, I saw it recognition, and perhaps even allegiance. The music swelled, covering Sophia's final hiss of warning. The guests kept clinking glasses, oblivious to the rot blooming beneath their feet. Yet I stood there, pulse hammering, the envelope pressed close to my heart, and I knew the party's glittering surface masked something darker. This was not just a night of inheritance. It was a battlefield, and I had stepped into the war without armor. And for the first time, I wanted to fight. I could have stayed in that corner, hidden in the noise of crystal glasses and string music, clutching the envelope like a secret too fragile to breathe. But something inside me snapped, the quiet endurance I had carried for decades, shattered beneath the weight of what I had overheard. Sophia's hiss, Alexander's threat, Marlene's knowing eyes, all of it pressed me toward a choice. Either vanish again into silence, or stand in the fire my father had lit for me. My legs carried me before my mind could argue. I walked back into the heart of the ballroom, the lights glaring hotter, the chandeliers swinging slightly, as though the room itself sensed the shift. The orchestra faltered when they saw me take the stage, the notes hanging unfinished. Conversations dimmed, laughter thinned, and soon the hum of expectation rose like static. They thought I had come to beg or to apologize for daring to exist. They were wrong. I pulled the envelope from my jacket. Its wax seal gleamed in the light, golden and undeniable. The room tilted toward me, hungry with curiosity. My father's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering like a blade drawn too quickly. Alexander's smirk wavered a crack in the performance he had rehearsed his entire life. I broke the seal with a sound sharper than glass shattering. The letter unfolded in my trembling hands, the crest of Henry Coleman stamped across the top. My voice quivered at first, but steadied as the words left my mouth. To my grandson, Ethan Coleman, if you are reading this, it means the truth has been delayed, perhaps even hidden. But it cannot be erased. I built this empire to rest not on arrogance or cruelty, but on integrity. And for that reason, I leave my controlling shares, my company, and my estate to you. The silence was thunderous, and then the chaos began. My father's hand jerked. The glass of bourbon he held slipped, crashing onto marble liquid, bleeding into the cracks like spilled pride. His face drained of color, his mouth opening, but no words escaping. Alexander surged forward, rage overtaking Polish, his voice cracking as he shouted, "This is a lie! A forgery!" He made this up. Cameras turned toward him, shutters clicking like gunfire. The guests' whispers swelled, a tide of disbelief and hungry fascination. My mother, Victoria, sat rigid, her gaze locked not on me, but somewhere beyond, as though if she avoided my eyes she could vanish from this reckoning. She lifted her glass again, her hand shaking, sipping silence instead of choosing a side. I lifted the documents higher, the legal stamps glinting under the chandelier. "These are binding," I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected. My grandfather made his decision clear. "The empire you thought was already crowned does not belong to you, Alexander. It belongs to me." The room erupted, gasps, shouts, reporters lunging closer, flashes exploding across my vision. And in the center of it all, my father's empire cracked open under the weight of truth. The uproar from my reading had barely settled when my father lurched forward, his voice raw, desperate, stripped of the regal command he once wielded. "This is a fabrication," he barked, his hand slamming down on the podium as if force alone could crush the truth. A staged performance, a cheap trick to humiliate me. The veins in his neck stood out, his chest heaving, but the confidence behind his words was hollow. For the first time, the man had towered over me, looked small. He scanned the room, searching for allies among the glittering crowd businessmen who once bowed politicians, who once clung to his influence. But no one stepped forward. Their gazes slid away, unwilling to share in his demand. The silence of their retreat was louder than any applause Alexander had ever received. Then Robert Hayes emerged from the throng, his aged frame steady, his voice carrying the authority my fathers had just lost. "Victor, you know this is no trick. Edmund Coleman's wishes were clear, witnessed, and notarized. You were in the room when it was signed." He held up another set of papers, older, yellowed at the edges, embossed with seals that shimmered under the chandelier light. His hand didn't tremble. It was my father's that did. Marlene, the housekeeper, who had been the silent spine of our household for decades, stepped forward as well. She was not dressed in silk or jewels, but her presence silenced the murmurs. "I was there that night too," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I saw him write it. I heard his words. Mr. Henry made it clear. This company was meant for Ethan. He said compassion was strength, not weakness." The blow landed harder than any shout. My father staggered back, his hand gripping the edge of the podium for balance. The mighty Richard Coleman, who had crushed competitors and cowed senators, now looked cornered, exposed. Alexander's face twisted into something savage. His polish cracked, and with a roar he lunged toward me, hand outstretched, to rip the documents from my grasp. Gasps scattered through the room. But before he could reach me, two of my father's oldest allies, men who had built fortunes under his empire, stepped in. Their hands clamped down on his arms, pulling him back with grim efficiency. Their eyes no longer burned with loyalty to Alexander, they burned with fear of being caught on the wrong side of history. The cameras flashed, immortalizing the chaos, my father pale and trembling. Alexander restrained and snarling, Robert Hayes with the documents raised high, Marlene standing tall beside him. And me no longer the invisible son, but the one holding the empire's fate in my hands. My father tried one last time, his voice cracking. "These are lies, all of them." But the tremor in his tone betrayed him. No one believed him anymore. His reign of fear, built on decades of unchallenged authority, had fractured in a single night. And in that fracture I saw it clearly, the fall of a king who thought himself untouchable. The echo of my father's broken denial still clung to the air when I stepped forward, clutching the letter that had turned the night upside down. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my voice rose steady, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I am the heir to Coleman Industries." The words didn't just belong to the room, they belonged to me, spoken aloud for the first time, defying years of silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The same people who had laughed at my humiliation only moments before now leaned forward, eyes wide, weighing which side of history to stand on. The shift was palpable. Their applause was hesitant at first, a scatter of claps, but it grew swelling into a sound I had never once been offered in my life. They weren't cheering for my father. They weren't celebrating Alexander. They were acknowledging him. Alexander strained against the men holding him, spitting curses, his face red with fury. His polished veneer was gone, replaced by raw desperation. He shouted that I was nothing, that I'd always be nothing, but the wind no longer echoed his belief. His words fell flat, swallowed by the momentum of truth. And then from the table where she had sat frozen, my mother rose. Victoria's hands trembled, pearls rattling against the silk of her gown, tears streaking down her face. For decades, her silence had been my deepest wound, her choice to look away, while my father stripped me piece by piece. But now she crossed the ballroom floor, each step unsteady but resolute, until she stood beside me. She took my hand in both of hers and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Forgive me. I should have defended you. Henry was right, you were always the one." Her tears seared more deeply than my father's cruelty ever had, but they healed too. For the first time I felt chosen by her. Not everyone stood with me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sophia rise her chair, scraping back like a knife unsheathed. Her gaze was cold, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against marble, a deliberate rhythm that sounded like a promise of battles yet to come. The ballroom pulsed with shifting allegiances. Some guests offered handshakes and hurried congratulations, eager to align themselves with the future. Others whispered behind napkins, calculating what this revelation meant for their own fortunes. Yet beneath their motives, I recognized something real recognition. The sun they once called invisible now stood at the center. I tightened my grip on my grandfather's letter. My mother's hand still trembled in mine. For years I had lived in the shadows of men who measured worth in power and cruelty. Tonight, for the first time, the shadows had lifted. I was no longer the forgotten son. I was the heir. And with that inheritance came a burden heavier than any humiliation I had ever carried the responsibility to lead. The applause, uneven and uncertain, still echoed when I finally looked back at my father. Richard Coleman, the Titan of steel, the man who had once filled every room with his shadow, sat slumped in his chair. His shoulders hunched. His hands trembled against the tablecloth, and his eyes, once blazing with command, stared blankly at the shattered glass at his feet. In that instant, the man who had ruled my life through fear looked smaller than I had ever imagined. His empire had not ended with triumph, but with collapse. I wanted to hate him, to savor his downfall, as he had savored my humiliation. But the words from my grandfather's letter still echoed in my mind. This empire was never meant to be built on cruelty. It belongs to the one whose heart is strong enough to forgive. Forgiveness was a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb, not yet. But for the first time, I considered that maybe my strength wasn't in vengeance. It was in choosing a different way forward. I read those words aloud again, letting the weight of them hang in the air. The crowd shifted, their murmurs softening. Some nodded. Others simply watched me with the wary respect people give a man who has stepped into destiny. For years I had been invisible. Tonight every eye followed me. Then presence in the center. Marlene, the housekeeper who had seen my family's rise and rock, leaned close. Her whisper was almost lost beneath the music that struggled to be still. Ethan, there's something else. The truth she never told you. Be ready. The chill that raced through me was colder than the laughter had ever been. My mother, still clutching my hand moments before, looked at me with tear-filled eyes that now seemed to hold more than guilt. Secrets layered upon secrets. The letter had revealed one truth, but Marlene's words promised another one I wasn't sure I wanted to face. Yet the ballroom demanded movement. The stage stood waiting. The microphone abandoned after my father's collapse. My legs felt heavy, but I walked forward, each step echoing louder than the orchestra's hesitant notes. I climbed the few steps, turned to face the crowd, and for the first time I didn't feel like an intruder in my own family's story. My name is Ethan Coleman. I said, my voice steady, though my chest ached with everything I carried. I am the heir of Coleman Industries. Tonight is not the end, it's the beginning. The cameras flashed. Guests rose, some clapping, some whispering, all witnessing the fracture of one era and the birth of another. Behind me, my father sat broken. My brother seethed. My mother wept, and Marlene's warning burned in my ear. The night closed not with certainty, but with a storm of possibilities. I had claimed an empire, but in doing so I had stepped into a future laced with trials and truths still hidden. And as I stood beneath the chandeliers, the applause pounding in my ears, I understood victory was only the first battle. The real war was just beginning.